Have you ever wondered what would happen if L was the bad guy and Light used the Death Note to try and protect innocent people? How far would L go to turn Kira into a monster, even if it meant faking evidence and putting innocent lives on the line? And more importantly, when Light finally got L's real name, would he choose to kill him or would he accept being put on trial alongside him? Before we dive in, I'm Shoyo. Go ahead and drop a like and subscribe to the channel because it really helps out. Now, let's find out what would happen if L was evil and Kira was the good guy. Well, in this scenario, it would all start with Light's first test run with the Death Note. Just like in the original story, he'd find the notebook in the school courtyard and think it was just a prank. Except that night, a news broadcast would show a kidnapper holding a bunch of kids hostage. But instead of just writing down that he'd die of a heart attack, Light would specify that the guy had to let the kids go, confess, and then die right after. The man would release the hostages, but wouldn't be able to finish his confession. Seconds later, he'd drop dead. Light would learn his first lesson. The Death Note was powerful, but it wasn't magic. It could control someone's actions before they died, but it couldn't make up information or do the impossible. When Ryuk showed up, Light would be totally freaked out. There was just one catch. Those kids were alive because of him. Before using the notebook again, Light would set some ground rules. First, never kill based on suspicion. Second, don't target investigators. Third, prioritize dangerous criminals. And fourth, double check guilt using different sources. He'd also swear to ditch the Death Note if he ever started enjoying the fame. Ryuk would think it was all very cute and totally naive. Making rules was the easy part. Actually sticking to them would be a whole different story. Over the next few days, Light would look into kidnappers, murderers, and crime bosses who were still calling hits from behind bars. Sometimes he'd make his targets spill the beans on hideouts, accomplices, or victims. It wouldn't always work though. If someone didn't actually know the info, they'd just die without saying anything. The notebook couldn't magically uncover the truth for Light. It was just a weapon. And the real issue was the guy holding the pen. Even so, a ton of people would be saved. The media would start calling the guy behind it all Kira. Some would call him a killer, others a protector. Light would try to shut down the cult following, saying that nobody should kill in Kira's name. Secretly though, he'd start getting a kick out of seeing crime rates drop and his name taking over the news. That part of him that loved being admired was already creeping in. That's when L would take the case. This version of L wouldn't really care about figuring out if Kira was right or wrong. Justice was a nice word, but winning was what actually mattered. Kira would be the biggest challenge of his life, and L would use literally anyone as a pawn just to prove he was the smartest guy in the room. His first trap would go down in Kanto. A guy would be holding a family hostage, and the cops would be gearing up to breach. L would stall the operation and broadcast the kidnapper's name and face only in that specific region. An entire family would be put at risk just so he could test a theory. The moment Light realized the kid was about to die, he'd use the Death Note. The criminal would let the family go and then drop dead. L would narrow down his search area and call the plan a total success. Soichiro would be furious when he found out about the intentional delay. L would just brush it off, saying that while a few lives might have been lost, catching Kira would save thousands. It was the kind of twisted logic that let you do anything awful and just call it a necessary sacrifice. Soichiro would realize right then that L just saw innocent people as puzzle pieces. Then came Lind L. Taylor. The death row inmate would pop up on TV, call Kira out, and label him a murderer. Light would get pissed, sure, but trash talk didn't justify an execution, and the guy felt like super obvious bait. The trap would have failed, but this L wouldn't accept defeat, even when his own plan backfired. He'd secretly move up Taylor's execution, fake the time of death, and log it as a heart attack. Then he'd go public and announce that Kira killed his stand-in out of pure ego. Light would know that kill wasn't his. The real battle would kick off right there. L didn't just want to find Kira, he wanted to spin a narrative where Kira was the bad guy for everything. If the facts didn't back him up, he'd just make up better ones. A little later, Ray Pember would start tailing Light. Light would notice, but he wouldn't have any intention of taking him out. Ray was just a fed following orders. L, on the other hand, would feed some fake intel to a crook about cash being moved on a bus, and then he'd hold up the cops. Light would be on that bus. When the guy threatened a passenger, Light would use a piece of the notebook hidden in his watch to make the guy drop his gun, run away, and get hit by a car right after. Ray would definitely be suspicious of Light, but he'd also find out that the police knew about the threat and totally could have stopped the attack. Digging deeper, Ray would find comms linking back to L's team and decide to blow the whistle to the FBI. But L would find out first. He'd convince another criminal that Ray had ratted out his crew, give up Ray's location, and delay his backup. Ray would get killed, and L would claim Kira took out the agent. Set up the hit, cover the tracks, and frame the suspect. Easy. The thing is, Naomi Misora wouldn't buy it. Ray wasn't a criminal, didn't leave a suicide note, and got killed by some other guy. Retracing her fiance's steps, she'd zero in on the bus incident and eventually track down Light. Naomi would start keeping tabs on him, but Light would catch on. Instead of attacking her, he'd anonymously send her logs he snagged from Soichiro's computer, proving the police operations were intentionally delayed. Naomi would test her new informant with a fake lead. Light wouldn't fall for it, and the two would start trading info, even though they didn't trust each other at all. When they finally met face to face, Light would only admit that Elle was rigging investigations. Naomi would make it perfectly clear she suspected him too. Still, she'd set up a dead man's switch. All the dirt on Elle would get blasted out to the authorities, the FBI, reporters, and Whammy's house if she and Light ever failed to punch in their daily codes. The data dump would trigger on a 72-hour delay. Naomi would also stash evidence tying Light to Kira. That way, neither of them could take the other out without going down themselves. Light needed her, Naomi needed him, and Elle couldn't kill either of them without the whole world finding out his secrets. It wasn't really a team-up, it was more like a Mexican standoff, keeping everyone in check. Light would then join the task force. Elle would be cool with it, since Light was already his prime suspect, and he liked keeping his enemies close. The tennis match would still happen, but they'd be playing completely different games. Elle would be trying to prove Light was Kira, while Light would be doing the math on how many people Elle had actually gotten killed. For months, Elle would toss out fake cases, made-up suspects, and super sketchy ops just to see how Light reacted. Aizawa would start questioning Elle's methods, even though Matsuda still totally hero-worshipped him. Soichiro would be caught in the middle, torn between the world's greatest detective and tactics that were starting to look a lot like the crimes they were trying to stop. But Light would mess up big time too. A businessman would get accused of funding kidnappings and murders. The evidence seemed to check out from multiple sources, and the public was screaming for Kira to do something. Feeling the heat, Light would write the guy's name down, telling him to confess and spill where the victims were. The confession never happened. The businessman just died. Naomi would figure out that some of the evidence was totally faked by his business rivals. The guy definitely had mob ties, but he wasn't the one calling the shots on the kidnappings. Light just killed a guy for the wrong crime. Even worse, when the public cheered, a part of him actually felt proud, and that scared him way more than any rule in the notebook ever could. Naomi would confront him, and Light would come clean about having a power that could kill. He wouldn't hand over the notebook, but he'd explain his rules and admit he broke them. Naomi wouldn't let him off the hook. Saving people didn't magically erase the ones he murdered. Once Elle was behind bars, Light was going to have to answer for every single body dropping. And he was okay with that. From that point on, his endgame was to stop Elle, secure the evidence, and then turn himself in. Then Misa Amane would crash the party as the second Kira. With her own death note and the Shinigami eyes, she'd start dropping criminals just based on news reports and threatening TV hosts to get Light's attention. When she finally met him, she'd expect to see some vengeful god, but instead, she'd find a guy whose ego had kept him from owning his mistakes early on. Light would show her cases of people who were falsely accused and break it down for her. The death note didn't know who was actually guilty. It just killed whoever's name you wrote in it. Misa would agree to back off, mostly because she was obsessed with Light. It wasn't exactly a moral awakening, but hey, it was a start. Soon after, she'd see Elle's real name, Elle Laliette. Now Light could finally take out his worst enemy. It was almost too easy, but he'd order Misa not to write the name down. Killing Elle would trigger a massive investigation, destroy evidence, and probably activate a bunch of fail-safes Elle set up in case he died. Plus, Light had already made up his mind that he wasn't going to use the notebook to dodge karma. Elle would pick up on Misa's reaction and have her grabbed. She'd get locked up in solitary and put through absolute psychological hell. Rem would think about killing Elle, but Misa would stop her because the detective had already set up fake files and strike teams ready to take Misa down if he kicked the bucket. Light and Naomi would leak some of their evidence, forcing them to transfer Misa into official custody. During the chaos, Elle would order a raid on Light's stuff. Drugged up during interrogation, Light couldn't stop Elle from finding the secret compartment in his watch and swiping the piece of paper he used on the bus. The second Elle touched it, he'd see Ryuk, and that would be the massive plot twist. Up until then, Elle was faking deaths to frame Kira. Now, he could literally pull the trigger himself. He'd test the scrap of paper on an inmate and confirm that all he needed was a name and a face. Then he'd start taking out witnesses tied to his shady ops, copying Light's style to throw people off. When Watari noticed deleted logs, he'd send backups to Whammy's house. Elle would catch on and write down Quilch Whammy's name right before Watari could talk to the task force. Watari's death would push Nier to look into the files. He'd spot two completely different patterns. One, Kira going after hardcore criminals, and another one tying up loose ends. Mello would track the FBI comms and raise murder. Elle's successors would officially start investigating Elle himself. Meanwhile, Elle would whip up some fresh fake evidence and arrest Light. Soichiro would be forced to face his son, and Light would finally stop lying. He'd admit he was Kira, explain where he messed up, and tell his dad he planned to turn himself in as soon as he stopped Elle. Soichiro would be absolutely crushed. He still loved his kid, but he couldn't pretend Light was innocent just because the other guy was way worse. Naomi would pull together Soichiro, Aizawa, Matsuda, Misa, Nier, and Mello into a temporary team-up. Nobody trusted Light, but L literally had a supernatural weapon. Nier would map out the logic of the case. While Mello used his connections to swap out the page, L was hiding and totally sabotage his security systems. L would invite everyone to a warehouse, promising to drop the ultimate proof against Kira. Obviously, that wasn't his real plan. He intended to force a confession, pump the place full of gas, lock the doors, and write down the names of anyone who could expose him. Light would confess right on camera. He'd own up to using the death note, take the heat for the bodies, and make it crystal clear he wasn't expecting to be forgiven. He wouldn't even try to play the hero. L would smirk and scribble down the names of Naomi, Soichiro, Misa, and the rest of the task force on his hidden page, and absolutely nothing would happen. The page had been swapped. The gas wouldn't go off, the doors would stay wide open, and the live stream would keep rolling. For the first time ever, L would lose the one thing he cared about most, controlling the narrative. Pissed off, he'd lunge for the real scrap of paper, hidden in a different pocket. In the scuffle, the paper and pen would land right in front of Light. Misa had already told him the name. All he had to do was write L Lolia, and it would all be over. Except Light wouldn't do it. He'd hold onto the paper for a few seconds and then hand it straight to Soichiro. L would be taken alive, beaten by the one choice he'd never be able to wrap his head around. Light choosing to face the music instead of catching another body just to win. For L, winning justified everything. If Light had done the same, the two of them really wouldn't be all that different. After that, they'd both face a highly classified trial. L would get hit with murder charges, tampering with evidence, illegal black ops, and trying to wipe everyone out in that warehouse. Even then, he'd claim his only real mistake was letting Light choose when to confess. Light would get slapped with a crazy long sentence. The lives he saved would be taken into account, but they wouldn't wash the blood off his hands for the people he killed without a trial, especially that businessman who got framed. So Ichiro would still visit his son, though their relationship would never be the same again. Misa would give up ownership of her death note and completely lose her memories of it. Naomi would help set up some serious oversight so no single detective could ever hijack a global investigation like that again. Nier and Mello would refuse to just step into L's shoes and would completely overhaul the succession program at Wami's house. Finally, Light would also give up his notebook after handing over all the intel they needed. He'd lose all his supernatural memories, but he'd still know exactly what he did by reading the court transcripts. So in this reality, Kira wouldn't exactly be a good guy. Light still committed horrible crimes and had to pay the price. Saving people didn't magically make all his choices right, and pleading guilty wouldn't bring anyone back to life. The big difference is that when faced with his worst enemy, he finally respected the one rule he should have followed from day one. Nobody should have the absolute power to decide who gets to live and who has to die. That leaves us to wonder, could Light really be considered a good Kira after everything he did in the end? Let me know down in the comments.